Today's date is the 4th of December, 2023. My name is Dennis Gill with the Americans in Wartime Experience. I am in Virginia conducting an interview with Karen King Johnson virtually. Thank you, Karen, for sitting down and talking to us.
Appreciate it.
Tell us where you are right now.
I'm in Hot Springs, Arkansas.
Hot Springs, Arkansas. Okay. Tell us a little bit about who you are. Where were you born, grow up, go to school, that kind of thing.
I was actually born in Fort Lee, Virginia. My
Okay.
dad was in the military at that time and stationed at Camp Lee as an artillery instructor in 1943.
Okay. And what branch of the service were you in?
Army.
Army. Okay. What made you decide to join the Army?
Well, my dad was killed before I was a year old.
Okay.
He was serving with General Patton's army. They were preparing for the Battle of the Bulge, and he was killed on November the 11th, 1944. So kind of just stuck with me.
Okay. Okay. So you decided that you were going to join to honor him, or how was it? What was the thought process there?
Well, my mother's brother was in the Navy, and he stayed in his whole time. So we had a military history in the family, and my dad's sister was married to an Army guy. Matter of fact, we were living with them. My mother was living with them while he was stationed at Camp Lee. At that
Okay.
time, it was Camp Lee.
Okay. And what year did you join the Army?
1965.
65. Okay. And what did you?
65.
65. Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
What did you do in the Army?
Well, I'd already graduated from college, so I went in through the officer candidate program and went to Fort McClellan for 5 months of officer basic training. They call
Okay.
it WOBC, WOBC, WAC Officer Basic Training. And then I was assigned to stay at Fort McClellan for a year as a training officer for incoming enlisted troops.
Okay. So tell us, when you joined the Army, did you have any idea what you wanted to do? Or you just kind of left that open to the Army to tell you what you were going to do?
Well, I kind of left it open, but my family had owned the hometown newspaper in Guthrie, Oklahoma for years, and I had my college degree in journalism and had worked out in Texas on a daily newspaper, so I was interested in doing something with reporting, newspapers, public relations, and the Army told me when I joined that I could not be able to tell the Army story because I didn't know anything about the Army. I might know how to tell stories, but I didn't know how to tell the Army story. So I was going to become a routine, regular Army officer and find out something about the Army first.
Okay. And how long did that last?
Well, after I left Fort McClellan, they sent me to Germany for 2 years, and I was in Frankfurt,
Okay.
and I was the commanding officer of the WAC detachment in Frankfurt. I was also the dependent schools officer for all the troops that had kids going to school in Germany and ran 2 high schools, the busing system, all the food services, the dorm. I learned a lot, but it was more like college type, how to be a dorm mother
Right. Right.
for a couple of years. And then they shipped me back to the States and sent me to the Defense Information School at Fort Benjamin Harrison. I guess they didn't think I knew how to tell the story either. And then I went to Fort Dix as the command information officer and ran the Fort Dix newspaper.
Okay. What did that entail? Running the newspaper.
It was a weekly paper. It had a contract with the local printing company to print it for free.
Okay.
But that was in like 1968 when we were really gearing up for Vietnam. And we had like incoming troops processing, like Joe Namath.
Oh, wow.
Came down there. Fort Dix was a big entry area for the whole Northeast United States. They all went through their basic training there. And so people would come down where they just had to process. They were going to get a deferment and get out. But whenever we had anybody important come down, I got to go meet them. It was kind of a lot of fun.
Wow. Wow.
So Broadway Joe was there for a while.
Okay. And you met him?
I did.
Okay. What was that like, that meeting?
He was really nice, and he actually took me to New York for the weekend, and we got to go to all the nightclubs because he could get in. He was wearing this nice fur coat. So I was so impressed. I can't even remember. I mean, it's just for someone who was 22 years old and getting ready to go out to a nightclub with Joe Namath, I mean, I was on cloud nine.
Wow. Wow. I bet he was popular in New York.
Oh, everybody knew him, but they were shouting at him across the street and all this other stuff. And I was just kind of in tow because he was being nice to me.
So how long were you at Fort Dix?
I was there from probably August of '68 until January of '70 when they shipped me back down to Fort McClellan for the women's advanced officer training.
Okay. What does that mean? What would be different about that than your regular officer training? Obviously, you've
And
advanced in rank a little bit.
yeah, it's that, and they're teaching you different skills because they think you're probably going to stay in the army and move on in different types of all the regulations and more command positions than when you were in basic.
Right.
But I was only there about a month before I got orders for Vietnam.
Okay. So you're off to Vietnam. When was this? What year?
1970.
Okay. Tell me, when you get to Vietnam, what are your first impressions? What strikes you the most?
It was amazing. We landed about midnight at Tan Son Nhut, and when they opened the plane door, of course, there's no snorkels. You're just out in the middle of a runway someplace, and like a million little people in black suits are just swarming the airplane because they didn't have a way to unload the luggage, and they had the old hand carts
Right.
that they were doing it, and the smell was just so different. It still sticks in my mind, like that jungle, sweet, sickening smell. And sergeant came on the plane and said, all GS-14s and general officers and above can get off the plane now. And nobody got up. And then he says, all field grade officers and above can get off the plane. And nobody got off the plane. And then he said, everybody else. And all 250 of us moved.
Wow.
So we came to the conclusion that we were everybody else.
Right. 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 So what did you do when you were in Vietnam? What was your job? Your
My
MOS?
first assignment was I was assigned to MACV headquarters in Saigon
Okay.
as the command information officer and the editor of what they called the MACV Observer, which was the newspaper that covered MACV, which is, of course, all the armed services together. And that was a lieutenant colonel's position, and I was a brand new captain, and that did not last long before uh, my old boss from Fort Dix showed up and took my job, and I got booted out to Long Binh uh, because they needed an editor of the Army Reporter, and that position also carried with it as the distribution editor for Stars and Stripes.
Okay. So what would be a typical day for you?
We were all over the country because running Stars and Stripes distribution and getting everything out. Uh, the Army is the executive agency for Stars and Stripes. We pay all the bills and distribute the paper and make sure that all the film got down to Saigon by
Right.
4 o'clock in the afternoon to catch a World Jet plane going to Tokyo where the printing presses were. And then the plane came back the next morning and it made 6 stops. It overflew, it landed in Cameron, overflew Saigon, and went over to Bangkok, and then came back and made 5 more stops in uh, Vietnam, letting off about 100,000 newspapers a day that had to be distributed down to unit level because the deal was for every 5 troops in the field, you got one newspaper. And if that didn't happen, you'd be surprised how many people could squawk if
Right.
they weren't getting their newspaper.
Right.
It was like being the kid on the bicycle delivering
Yeah.
newspapers in hometown USA, except you were doing it in a much bigger country.
Right. And you were on the move a lot, it sounds like.
Every time someone called in to complain, my general would say something like, "Wheels up in 5," and we'd get a pallet of papers and take them up to whatever unit was missing newspapers, etc.
Okay.
It was a kind of a big deal not to get your newspaper.
Right. Right. Wow. Wow. What were living conditions like for you?
Well, when I got there, my boss, who had to be the nicest guy I
Mhm.
ever met, Colonel Alfred Mock, and he's passed on now, but he was so sweet that he needed someone. He didn't have anyone there, and they had so many responsibilities that he just needed someone that could get the paper out that day because guy that I replaced, never forget him, Captain George, and we called him George of the Jungle.
Okay.
Uh, was on rotation back to the States, and they didn't have anyone else that knew actually how to put a newspaper together. Pagination, where the color went, the number of pages, the headlines, pica poles, all
Mm,
this other stuff. So he had actually made a deal with MacV to get me up there. Unbeknownst to me, they didn't even tell me I was going. They said the Jeep was packed and get in. That unbeknownst to me, or probably most other people, there were civilian DoD employees that worked in Vietnam, and the general staff had several civilian women who were their secretaries, stenographers, and things like this that worked for the brass upstairs,
okay.
and they had built them a little hooch uh, that had like 4 little private rooms in it, and one of them had left. So my boss got the general, which was General McCaffrey at that time, to give me that extra room because he was afraid I wouldn't stay and he wouldn't be able to get out his newspapers if he didn't have somewhere to do it. So I got a private room about the size of a closet with a cot in it.
Wow.
It was a wow. It was a big deal because other than that, it was 40 people to a barracks with a central bathroom. So
Right.
I got special treatment.
I see. I see. Uh, so why was it so important that everyone got their paper? What kind of information was there that they needed to have if they should miss, that it became such a big deal?
Well, the biggest deal was the crossword puzzle that was in it every day that
Okay.
that we bought, and the second biggest deal was a pinup. I mean, if we didn't have the pinup in there, people got really upset with us, and we got those to the Pentagon that bought them for our news service. But they liked it. The front page of the Pacific Stars and Stripes was always Vietnam. We were always the lead. What was going on? And so our job, we had 43 photographers in the field every day taking pictures of what the guys were doing. And we always gave them any picture we took for the newspaper, we gave them a copy back. So,
Okay.
and we sent it to their families and stuff. So just
Mhm.
showing them what was going on kind of the rest of the world because we had news from all over the Pacific, but then being able to send the news back to their parents to so that they could see what their sons and daughters were doing over there was kind of a big deal.
Right. Right. So you said you had news from the rest of the world with news from the United States as well.
Ye Yes, we did, the inside of the paper carried, news feeds that we got fr we had a UPI machine in
Yeah.
our office, and we pasted that in there. Matter of fact, we started a deal where we just, what we call a rip and tear operation. We just cut off the UPI feeds and paste them on a piece of paper, and there were, like,
Okay.
I think, 38 mess halls on Long Bend, and so every morning, we took those sheets around and put them on every table, and then we did it again at night because we our office ran 24/7, so that when they got up and went to the mess halls at 5 or 6 in the morning, they had just one page, but it was like 10 news leads on the front and 10 on the back. So they had 20 news stories about what was going on across the United States. I've actually talked to people who said that that was the first thing they ever read every day.
Wow. Wow. Was there any So, the news from the United States wasn't always good around that time. A lot of war protesting and that kind of thing. Was any of that included, or was that kind of kept back?
We did include it to a certain extent because even though we did not have cell phones
Hmm.
and AFDM was only on like 2 hours a day, we got to see Bonanza. That was about it. There wasn't much news because we
Okay.
had Good Morning Vietnam
Right.
coming over, and so they were telling us what was going on in Vietnam. But the troops could, you know, they got letters from home. They knew what was going on, so there wasn't any point trying to hide it.
Gotcha. Gotcha. How about the news going out of Vietnam? How much was that? Was that kind of restricted or censored or withheld?
There were 730 some odd foreign correspondents in Vietnam, and that included Americans. We consider them foreigners. There was a press briefing every day downtown Saigon. The press called it the 4 o'clock volleys
Okay.
because most of it was we could neither confirm or deny all their questions. And then we would schedule the bookings for who was going out the next day with their sound crews. Uh, where they wanted to go, Walter Cronkite, etc. All those had to be escorted by Army officers around wherever they went. And some of the units they wanted to go to were none too happy to see them uh, come in because they thought they disrupted the troops.
Right.
But the Pentagon wanted them out there, and they kind of controlled where we took them. But uh, they were still out there because you can see to this day all the video that was taken by the U.S. correspondents that were over there, and there were a lot of them.
Right. Right. So there was nothing that was held back.
Well, from our point of view, confirm or deny, I'd probably say that in my sleep nowadays still. And I was so trained to say that
Right.
because we didn't want to give up operational readiness. We weren't going to tell them where the troops were moving
Right.
to the next day, for
Right.
sure.
Yeah. Yeah, but there's a lot of speculation, and a lot of what was going on in Vietnam was withheld from the public for various reasons. They didn't want people to know what the truth was, or anything like that. But none of that you're aware of.
Well, when you get into things like that, where we talk about operational readiness as
Right.
opposed to something we just didn't want you to know, but one of the things that happened was Lieutenant Calley and his attorney came to Vietnam uh, to prepare for the trial after there was uh, what happened at My Lai 4,
Mm-hmm.
which happened while I was there. Matter of fact, they used my office because I had an air conditioned office because you can't develop film if it's above 68 degrees.
Mm-hmm.
And since we had a lot of film, I put my office right next to the film laboratory, so I got some cold air. And what happened was terrible, but there were a lot of different opinions about the military had classified Vietnam Hamlets as A Hamlets, B Hamlets, and C Hamlets. And A, they were friendly to us 24/7. B, we had them in the daytime,
Mm-hmm.
and the Viet Cong held them at night. And C, they were totally Viet Cong territory. And who we could shoot at and when we could shoot was highly regulated by how those Hamlets were assessed by our intelligence people. And sometimes C Hamlets, are shooting at you and you can shoot back. But if an A Hamlet's shooting at you, you can't shoot back. And it was a little discouraging for some of the troops that were being shot at. And, under the rules of engagement over there, we couldn't shoot back.
Mm-hmm. Wow. What were some of the biggest challenges that you faced while you were over there?
Well, a lot of it was when the troops were out in combat and loading trucks and out on what we call long range reconnaissance patrols, or they're out in fire support bases, there was stuff going on.
Mm-hmm.
They were engaged. But when they're sitting back in base camp waiting for the next action to go, there were no pizza parlors. There was nothing to do. It was very boring. And, the average age of the troop over there was between 18 and 19 years old. And they could get into some serious trouble just out of pure boredom. So
Right.
the commanders out in the field had their hands full with these guys that they didn't have anything that they could do for them. I mean, there wasn't even a place to really go swimming, depending on where you were sitting over there. And it was hot, it was dirty, it was loud, it was noisy, it was dangerous. You couldn't take a shower without bringing a can of green beans to keep the monkeys out of it, because if you didn't, they liked the water because it was cool. So you'd have to open a can of green beans and set it outside the shower. So it occupied them. So they didn't join you in the shower. And they have very sharp teeth, I found out.
Wow, I've never heard that story before. That the monkeys would get in the shower with you.
Oh, yeah. And, one of my duties when I was at MACV was to brief the incoming general officer that if they were going to play golf on the golf course down at MACV at Ton Sanut, that if they saw the ball go into the hole, but they didn't hear it go clink, 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 do not stick your hand in and pick it up, because there's probably a brown cobra in there curled up sunning itself. So the deal to the people the higher ups who had access to the golf course, got a briefing about how to play golf with a whole bunch of cobras on the field.
Wow. Did you have any time for R&R? Any time to kind
I
of
did,
unwind?
yeah, because I did 2 tours over there. They didn't have a replacement for me, so I stayed from July of 70 to March of 72. So I went to Australia with a friend of mine who was assigned she was the liaison to the Vietnamese Women's Army Corps. Most people didn't even know they had one, but they did. And then the next time I went to Hong Kong, and it was wonderful. I mean, the food in Hong Kong is so good
Wow. Yeah.
compared to sea rations.
Yeah. I'm sure. I'm sure. Um, did you get a chance to communicate with family at home? Letters or phone calls or anything like that?
Yes, I sent letters and tapes that we made. In addition, uh, one of the guys over there that I hung out with was at the Signal Battalion, and every so often he could patch me through Tinker Air Force Base, and I could actually talk to my mother.
Okay.
So, and I'm an only child, so she appreciated that. But we would everyone did what they had to do. We traded film to get head gaskets for the Jeep. We traded film to the Signal Battalion to be able to use their lines. You know, they got newspapers and extra treats from us. So, you know, the troops made it work. You know, they made it at least tolerable. Uh, you know, we would order our parents to send us Gino pizza kits.
Okay.
Well, we didn't have any way to cook pizza, so we would go over and trade film to the nurses to use the autoclave at the 24th Evac Hospital so we could bake our pizzas. And, you know, I talked to some nurses who remember getting the pizzas, letting us use their autoclaves, but everybody worked together to make it work. I mean, it when you've got like, you know, 3 or 4 generals and the rest of us are down the line, everybody learns how to make it go.
Right.
You know, whatever it took, we were going to make it work. And we didn't want anyone on our side to get killed. We didn't want anyone to get hurt. And we were all in it together.
Right. Well, are there any incidents that stand out in your mind when you think back on your time in Vietnam?
Yes, I have 2 guys that work for us at the user VIO office who are on the wall,
Okay.
one of which died while I was there out in the field. And the the APC he was riding on was hit by a rocket, and I had to go up to the Da Nang mortuary to take his dental records because there wasn't enough left to identify them. To and I mean things like that will never go away in your mind.
Right.
I Our unit, we still talk online. We have a little listserv for all the guys who served in the user VIO office, and there's no one in that unit that doesn't talk about Steve Henry Warner every time we have a conversation because he was in his first year of law school and therefore he wasn't exempt from the draft anymore when he came over there. But he was so dedicated to the guys who were out in the field and getting out there that we just couldn't keep him out of the field to come in and even take a rest. And that's kind of the way everyone was. I didn't meet anyone over there who wasn't prepared to do their job, 110%.
Right. Right. Um, did you have any close calls during your time there?
Uh, yes, one morning up at Pleiku, which was Second Field Force headquarters, uh, they were getting ready to close it down, and John Paul Vann, who uh, had been a lieutenant colonel over there and didn't think the war was running right, came back and as a civilian and was running 2 Corps. And that morning, the VC came over the wire, starting attacking the base. Uh, I'd been a guest there and was in a little French villa, and I think I got one boot on and a helmet and a flak jacket over uh, my pajamas and raced down. And one of the majors is there was running by without any clothes on, and he ran back to put his clothes on because we'd had a Korean band in the night before. And I'm going like, "Oh my God, you've got 5 children. You know, you shouldn't be running around here like that. You know, no one actually cares." So just because he was assigned to go to handle a machine gun post out there, but the chaplain and I crawled up under the slate pool table because we didn't have any weapons with us, and hoping for the best. And John Paul Van got his helicopter in the sky, and they got some of the South Vietnamese soldiers they had there up, and they quelled the coming over the fence and the breach. By 7 o'clock, we were all in uh, the base cafeteria having breakfast, and he told us what a good job we all did. Nobody got hurt. Uh, but we almost had VC coming up the hill on it. You could see them.
Right. Yeah. Tell us about your homecoming. I've talked to a lot of Vietnam vets that their homecoming wasn't that pleasant. They were told to take their uniform off, and I've even talked to a few that put wigs on so they looked like they had longer hair. How was your homecoming?
Well, when we got our plane actually stopped in Hawaii, and they had us get off and put our hands up against the plane, the whole plane load of us, and they sprayed us so we wouldn't have any bugs to bring back. So, welcome home from a grateful nation. Now put your hands on the airplane, spread your legs, and while we mist you down in case you have any jungle bugs with you. It wasn't too impressive.
Wow. How about when you got back to the mainland and got home and things like that?
Well, my mother was distraught because I got home about 8 o'clock in the morning, which was 8 o'clock Vietnam time. And my dad, my stepfather, had been a Marine in World War II. And when I came in, she said my clothes stunk and wanted me to change clothes into something. And by the time I got in the house, all I wanted was a drink or a shot of bourbon or something because we've been traveling for a long time. My mother cried because, oh my God, my daughter, who was a rainbow girl and goes to church in Cairo and all this other stuff, is having bourbon for breakfast. Oh my God. And my dad, who was a Marine private, said, shut up. If she wants a drink, give her a drink. And he got it out. He had a drink with me, and then she cried twice.
Wow. Did you make a career out of the Army?
I did stay in till 15 years. I had an opportunity to get out. The Army had an abundance of officers,
Okay.
and I was able to get out with a disability and go to law school.
Okay. Okay.
So, I suppose I could have tried to stay in, but they were looking for people that would go ahead and get out because we just had, by 1980, we just had way too many officers, and they didn't think they had another war coming up.
No.
It's like, you know, any place else that has too much and they have cutbacks.
Right. Right.
They called it a reduction in force, a RIF. So I took the opportunity, and by that time I met the guy I'm married to now. He had lived up the street from me. I was at Fort Monroe, and he was at Langley Air Force Base.
Okay.
And we got married, and he got an assignment to come to Little Rock and was a Titan II missile commander, and I went to law school.
Okay. What year were you at Fort Monroe?
I was there 76 to 80.
Okay. All right. Um, what is something that you would like? Somebody might watch this interview some years down the road. What would you like them to know about your service?
Most of us who were officers had it in the headquarters building, had it easier than some. As a matter of fact, some of my guys refer to their tour as the air conditioned jungle. But we all felt so kindred spirit with anything that we could do with the guys who didn't have it that good. And not that being away from everything is good,
Mm-hmm.
but the enlisted troops out there would do anything for us, and we would do anything for them. And it was purely nothing but teamwork. I talk to the Army nurses all the time because they're about the only other women who served over there.
Yeah.
And if you look at the survival rate, it was like 97, 98% of the troops who were injured. There were 350,000 of them injured. And if you just look at what that generation did and came home and went back to work and raised their families and went on with it. But we did the best we could. America might not have appreciated it, but we did what we were told to do. And when we look at now, downtown Saigon, Ho Chi Minh City, the biggest Nike factory in the world. So
Yeah.
maybe it will all come around where it will be a positive experience.
Yeah. What advice would you give somebody who watches this?
Just know that everybody over there tried their best. Like I said, we put out 100,000 copies of a newspaper a day. We had no computers. We
Mhm.
still used a typewriter that had correction tape on it, and we took care of the distribution of 100,000 copies a day with pencil and paper. So everybody did the best they could with the conditions they had, and we all stuck together, and we did it as a team, and everybody worked together. We all cared for each other, and we weren't going
Mhm.
to leave anyone behind that we couldn't bring back. And having said that, my cousin was over there, and he was a medevac helicopter pilot, and he's still MIA. We don't have his body back yet. And that weighed heavily on all of us, and we tried our very best every day to make sure everybody was going to come home.
Yeah. What is your cousin's name?
James Leslie Dayton.
Okay. Was he shot down? Is that
Yes,
what happened?
there were four of them, and they were about 35 miles outside Da Nang, and they were coming into a hot spot where the ground troops had wounded, and they were trying to get in, and a rocket hit their plane in the sky,
Okay.
and it crashed. But it was so hot, and the Viet Cong was shooting so much they couldn't get in. They got in 2 or 3 days later, and they could see some burned bodies around there. But again, it was such a hot spot they couldn't get in. And by the time we finally uh, were able to get back to them, there wasn't anything there. So we don't know. But I'm the only surviving relative of his. And I have talked to the recovery teams, and they are going back and excavating more sites. And I'm hopeful they'll find his body.
Right. Right. That's something that we hope for. Yes. Is there anything else that you'd like to talk about we haven't talked about? Anything else you
There,
want to document?
there were good times over there when everybody worked together. You were able to get together and have a pizza together, or uh, like one of the things for the troops that were out in the field. Some of the guys who had access to a helicopter, I'd wear my hat and hang a price tag on it. We go out, as a guy had a guitar, and we'd fly out to the bases at night and do mini Pearl imitations or Grand Ole Opry imitations or sing or whatever. But uh, those were places where the USO couldn't go. It was too
Hmm.
hot for them to get in there. So we would fly out and do that. And we had a little traveling show that we went around to anybody that wasn't on the list to get a USO or Red Cross visit. And we would take anything we could steal from the mess hall. Pardon me, steal is not a good word. Appropriate from the mess
Right.
halls. So the mess sergeants would give us stuff to take out there because those guys were getting hot meals. They were purely on sea rats, so if we could grab something, and so we went out every night after we got off work for the day shift and visited any troops that we could find in the field with just our banjos and guitars and snacks from the mess hall that we could get. But everybody did that. Everybody did everything they could to try to make it just tolerable for you.
Yeah. It sounded like everybody banded together because you were all in the same boat. You're all
We were,
someplace you didn't want to be.
yeah. When I would get out there, sometimes in the sea rats they had like a little uh, wrapper of coffee
Hmm.
grounds. I mean, it was ground coffee. It wasn't instant coffee. And we're looking at each other like, how the heck are you going to make coffee with this? We don't have any hot water out here. So we'd fire up a helicopter and take drippings off the pitot tube when we drained it out. I
Okay.
says, I have no idea how much money it costs us to make a cup of coffee, but we'd out there in the morning, yeah, on the top of those mountains. Sometimes it was a little chilly up in the central highland, firing up helicopters to make a cup of coffee.
Wow.
I says, the poor taxpayers, if they only knew
Making
how much
coffee with a
JP.
helicopter.
Well, every plane when you start it up has condensation, just like on your car.
Right.
But it was hot when it came off, and you drained them out, and we'd put the coffee grounds in our T-shirt and drip it through, and you could get some hot coffee that way. So everybody, were ingenious. Like we said, baling gum and baling wire and bubble gum, we made it work.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That's interesting. Well, on behalf of the Americans in Wartime Experience, thank you very much for taking time out of your day to tell your story. I want to thank you for your service, and I want to welcome you home.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.